Hello, everyone. Welcome to this Food Shift workshop. My name is Sofia Parente. I'm head of local action at Sustain. And Sustain, we're an alliance of over 100 organizations working together for a better food and farming. We're based in the United Kingdom, but we're part of Food Shift, which is a large European program that brings together 9 city regions across Europe, as well as a consortium of organizations. And what we've been doing is identifying, nurturing, scaling up innovations to address some of the most pressing issues in our food system. And some of that challenging addressing these issues requires changes in policy. And this is the theme of our workshop. So driving changes in food policy at a local level. And we think it would be a good theme for the workshop because there's been a growing interest in local food policy, and this is being driven by concerns around food safety, food insecurity, the contribution of the food and farming sector to create wealth at a local level, jobs, but also because of the environmental impacts of food and farming. And we know that local authorities have a huge role to play here. They may own and manage land. They may buy food for schools, nurseries, care homes. They have licensing powers. They have planning powers. So they can change what's happening at a local level. And this will be the last Food Shift workshop. So we've previously organized workshops on governance, citizenship, innovations, for places around Europe that are interested in working at this level. And Food Shift is coming to an end later this year. So this is also a nice moment to celebrate the learnings, the achievements of Food Shift. And you'll hear later today from the coordinators, Luke and Christian, about some of that. But if you want to stay connected, there's a really nice opportunity here. We established a forum, an email forum called Food Shift Plus. So if you are interested in connecting with individuals and organizations working at a local level to change food and farming, do join this forum if you're not already there. And we're going to paste those details in the chat. And I'll pass on to Ben Messer, our facilitator for today. Thank you, Ben.
Thank you, Sophia. Welcome, everybody. I'm Ben Messer. I work for Food Matters. We work very closely with Sustain on many projects, but in particular on the Sustainable Food Places program. As Sophia said, I'm a facilitator. I'm going to be trying to keep things moving smoothly today in this session. We've got an hour and a half. We probably will use all of that. And my suggestion is that we just motor straight through that hour and a half rather than taking a break. But if you need to, please feel free to take a break. We have the chat function, as Sophia has pointed out. If you want to say something or contribute to the discussion as it's going on, just put your hand up near the screen and we'll try and pick up on that, or use the reactions button at the bottom of the screen. I'll just do it. I'm sorry, my screen is flashing. I apologize for that. I hope it doesn't put people off. You can use your sort of raise hand to try and make a point if you want to. But this is quite a participatory session, as Stephanie mentioned at the offset. It's really good to hear from you and your experience as much as from the people who we'll be introducing later on. I'm not going to say much more than that. We have a sort of a structure. We're going to be a bit of context very briefly, a little bit of you sharing your own experiences. Then, as I say, a bit of a conversation to provide some inspiration, and then following up with a bit of a conversation about what's happening next with Food Shift and an upcoming conference that you'll need to hear about. I'm just going to say a little bit about food policy. I just check, actually, Sophia, were you going to say something now, or shall I go ahead?
Go ahead, Ben.
Yeah, I'm not going to say much other than, what is it we're actually talking about here? As you will know, some local governments, some local authorities have specific food policies, possibly around food procurement, school food, maybe the promotion of junk food and trying to clamp down on that, looking at food production or looking at food security, specific food policies. But there are also policies that have a wider scope but have a food dimension. So we might be then talking about waste policies or tourism, economic development, or health, or even sort of stimulating livelihoods in your place. Sometimes food policies may be associated with much wider strategies, like a climate action strategy will have a food policy component to it, as will sort of environmental development and environmental sustainability and developments around that, community development, and maybe even looking at poverty strategy. There will be a food dimension to those sort of strategies and campaigns. I'm going to suggest that in this session, we consider all of these in terms of how we can influence those different policies. So we'll think about all of those different dimensions. I'll also just mention that it's worth recognizing that sometimes these policies don't appear to be that coherent. They can actually pull in slightly different directions, and there may be trade-offs between policies. So it's a complex context. It can be quite confusing. We also need to acknowledge, and I'm seeing already in some of the chat responses to our opening question, that partnerships and alliances and collaborations of one sort or another, working across sectors or silos, if you like, and also focused on a more holistic whole food system view, probably have a very important role in developing a more coherent policy sort of framework, and also to navigate those trade-offs that I just alluded to. This will help avoid piecemeal food policy and that incoherence, and it could help develop a more integrated, overarching food policy. So I've just gone blah with a whole load of stuff there, just my thoughts on food policy, just to set the scene a bit. But I think when it comes down to it, we're very interested in hearing what you feel and what you think about food policy where you are, how you have been affected by it, and how you feel you want to try and influence it, and what has been successful and less successful. So in order to do this, we thought immediately we'd get you involved rather than just listening. And we're going to split you up into breakout rooms. We're going to ask you to consider a question. The question has sort of sub-questions associated with it. So you're going to be in groups of 4 or 5, something like that. And very similar to the question I posted when you arrived, the question is, from your experience, what is the best way to influence local food policy? What has worked well for you? What are, if you like, what are your top tips? And what is the best place to start if you want to have that influence on local food policy? Now, you're going to have a total of just 10 minutes to have a quick conversation with the people in your room. Stephanie has also, or Sophia has also just posted a link to a Google Jamboard, and we'll use that for you to very quickly document some of the key things that come out of your conversations in your breakout rooms. So if you can open the Jamboard, it's fairly straightforward. You can, hopefully it's quite intuitive. You pick up a post-it note from the icon list on the side, add it to the board and add your comment to it as well. You can all do this. It doesn't have to be one person doing it, but please just add your thoughts, key thoughts onto that Jamboard, and we can use that when we come to the discussion afterwards. But basically, I'm going to ask you, think about that question, share your own experience with each other in those breakout rooms. We'll give you a heads up when you've had 8 minutes so you can begin wrapping up. And we'll also then give you a countdown after 9 minutes to the 10-minute point where the breakout rooms will close. So again, I've gabbled that. Hopefully it was clear, but I'm going to ask Stephanie now to click the button and send you to your breakout rooms, and I'll see you all on the other side.
Are we back on? Hello, have we just been put into a new group then? Is that what we're assuming?
Oh. We're back to the plenary. We're just waiting for Ben.
Ah, okay, sorry.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back. I hope you had valuable conversations there. I was in one of the rooms and was listening in whilst also looking at the Jamboard. There's a lot of interesting things there. Some of it was also on the chat to begin with, and interesting stuff. I was just picking up on a few things that jumped out at me. The first one was strong female leadership, which obviously jumped out at me as a male. I thought I'd just draw attention to that. Policy decisions are often made by men. I just wondered if anybody wanted to elaborate on that, who sort of made that comment. You don't have to if you don't want to, but it jumped out at me as something quite interesting.
Audrey, you're muted. If you want to unmute yourself.
Sorry. I made that comment, and I saw it in work in actual happenings is when one of the university's departments, a woman took over as director, and she immediately spoon-fed the delegates, and everybody was taking decisions by actually giving them menus and buying local and so on. And I said, well, previously, men in suits had been taking these decisions, and with all respect to them, they just didn't know about food and weren't interested in it. They didn't sort of go with the suits and ties business. But if you got a woman in who's the family and whole cultural background is food, probably more so than her academic work. And that's why it worked.
Yeah. Can I just check? Did you also add the comment involve people by the stomach? Was that yours as well?
That was yeah, and that's what she did. So after that, people could remember the asparagus and the and the fresh fruit that they consumed at that conference. It had real meaning for them.
Yeah, I just picked up on chat there that Eloise has added to your point there about women, that it speaks to a wider point generally about citizen representation. And I think that's what we're talking about here. And thank you for that, Eloise. I think that's really apposite, that comment there. Again, picking up on some of the themes that I saw coming through there, policy change needs to benefit local communities. And I think that's a fundamental. And I think I saw that in the chat at the beginning of the session as well. National policy implemented locally is quite difficult to influence it if it's a national policy that you're dealing with. That is a challenge that people face around different aspects of policy influence. Again, someone said it's important to show the benefits of food policies to multiple agendas. I think that's very true. We talked about this complexity, overlapping, sometimes trade-offs, but if you can show that a policy benefits a number of different agendas, that's a very strong way to actually get more traction with what you're talking about. But fundamentally, it's about building relationships. I've seen that mentioned a few times, building relationships with people in the situation that they can set policy, building those relationships and building collaborative relationships to actually influence those decision makers yourselves. Those are things I picked up on just looking at the Jamboard. Before we move on, can I just check, does anybody else want to sort of highlight something that they heard or something that they mentioned when they were in their breakout group? Again, just either put your hand up or use the reactions if you do want to say something. Okay, well, I would recommend keeping an eye on chat. There's useful.
And there's a hands up from Carolyn.
I missed that. Sorry, Carolyn. You must be on another. Oh, there you are. Hello. Sorry. Do you want to go ahead? Yeah.
Yeah. I think something that I don't know if it's been mentioned on the Jamboard, because we're coming up against this, is that although partnerships are really, really important, and cross discussions, as you say, in that it helps many different types of policies, the funds tend to be linked to a certain, like for instance, I'm in 5 councils, so funding and budgets tend to be linked directly to one area, and it's very difficult to get funding to share across departments. So this idea of, even if you get people from the different departments all talking to each other and they understand how their decisions are reacting or making an impact on somebody else's decision around climate or food or whatever it is, or food insecurity or food poverty or health, it's difficult then to fund the projects because the budgets belong within a certain category. And this idea of sharing budgets, particularly say for school meals, to increase the budget for school meals for local organic food, for instance, is a really complex one, because there isn't the shared budgets that are coming from the economy, or the climate budget or whatever it is. So I think there's something around that about working budgets and linked with policy that affects and benefits loads of different areas.
Yeah, thank you, Carolyn. My experience of working with food partnerships, which bring together those different interests into one sort of collaborative group, that could be a conduit through which some of that funding could be used across different agendas. I'm not saying it's the answer to everything, but I think if you have a collaborative partnership approach in your place, and you have a good relationship with your local authority, that might be a route to navigate that challenge worth exploring. Okay, I am conscious of time, unless there's anything really pressing that anybody else wants to add to this conversation. The Jamboard will stay open, so please feel free as we go through this session to add things to the Jamboard as well as to chat. But I think I'm going to move on, if that's okay, to the next section, which is a little bit about the sort of inspiration from people who have been working on this. It's part of their remit in the work that they do. We have a panel of 3 speakers who are going to tell us some of their experience of working around food policy at different scales. We have Anne Palmer, who's working on the US Food Policy Networks project at the Johns Hopkins Center for Livable Futures. We also have Eloise Baum, who's from the Bristol Food Network in the UK, and Luke Schaefer, who's from the Food Shift 2030 project. I'm not going to go any further in terms of introducing them, because I'm going to ask them to very briefly do that themselves, if that's okay. So each of you, if I could just hold you to either 2 or 3 minutes, very quickly introduce something about the background of what you're doing in your work, where you are, the scope of it, and how long you've been doing it. And if I could, I'll start with Anne, if that's okay. Anne Palmer. Welcome, Anne. You're still muted.
Sorry, there we go. It's wonderful to join you today. It's always great to hear what's going on in other parts of the world, because we do try and pay attention to that, because we're always sort of learning from each other. So I will just do a brief introduction about our center and the work that we've been doing there. So we are a academic center located at the Bloomberg School of Public Health at Johns Hopkins. We're in Baltimore, Maryland. Our center's been around for about 26 years, and we do research and education and programs that intersect public health, food production, diet, and the environment. Our project, called Food Policy Network, started about 10 years ago, and it's been a very iterative process for us. We started it with the goal of looking at how could we build capacity of the food policy councils that were popping up around the country. There were probably around 50 about that time, maybe 70 or so. It was a pretty small number. And when we started, we did a survey of those councils, and that survey has kind of helped us determine where to focus our work and how to help people. So it's both in the process of actually creating a food policy council and in the content pieces where we're looking at the actual policies themselves. It's a very loose network. I'll talk a little bit about what we do. We have a survey that we do. We're wrapping that up right now. That's about every 18 months. And that data that we learn in the survey helps drive where we focus our work. We do research and we collaborate with other researchers. We do something called curbside consulting, where about every month we offer free consultations with groups that they can come and ask us any question, and we try and connect them with the folks that we think can best help them answer that. We have a resource directory that we also create resources for groups. So we have like different resources that we produced. And we do conversations like this as well. We used to do a lot more webinars, and now we're really shifting that format to more conversations. And then the final thing we've been doing the last couple of years is something we call communities of practice, where we have a community of practice that's been going on for a couple of years with food policy councils around the US focused on racial equity, economic justice, and healthy communities. And it's really about how can groups, we saw this huge surge in interest, and we were working with them to figure out how to integrate that in their work, both in their processes and the policies they're working on. And then we have a relatively new community of practice that's focused on conceptualizing regionalism. So for the councils that are working at the regional level mostly it's across multiple county boundaries, how do they develop governance structures? How do they work on policy together, et cetera? So I'll stop there.
Brilliant. Thank you, Anne. And we'll come on to the actual work that you're doing specifically around influencing policy when we get into the conversation. Thank you for that introduction. Really spot on. So, Eloise, if possible, could you just tell us a bit again, just the background of...
I can, yeah. So I've just got a couple of quick slides. Okay, so Bristol Food Network started as a grassroots organisation, so probably almost 30 years ago now. And then we've been a community interest company for nearly 10 years. So we really are a network in that we support, inform and connect anyone in the city who is interested in making the food system more sustainable and resilient. We are the food partnership organisation for Bristol, so a member of the Sustainable Food Places Network, and we've been at the heart of lots of campaigns and activity in recent years. So this kind of just shows you some of the key things that have happened. So a Food Policy Council first was set up in 2010, and then my colleague Joy wrote a very seminal report looking at the Bristol food system in 2011, and since then there's been lots of things happened at policy level and by us to move us through silver and gold awards for sustainable food places, and now to develop this programme of work we've worked on for nearly the last 2 years, called Bristol Good Food 2030. So you can find this on our website. This is a summary of the goals that with stakeholders we have set for the city around the food system for the rest of this decade. So we've engaged with about 50 organisations and probably 100 stakeholders to put this together. And now we're working through our steering group, our partnership, to make sure that this is implemented over the coming years. So you can find out more on our website, where you can see the plans in more detail. And please do sign up to our newsletter if you want to find out more about what we're doing, or you can put me an email if you want to. There's an email address at the bottom there.
Brilliant. Thank you, Eloise. That's fantastic. Great work there in Bristol. I have to say I know a little bit about it. It's one of the pioneering sustainable food places partnerships. So it's one of 93 partnerships which bring together people with a stake in the food system in different places, 93 different places, as Sophia has just posted in chat there as well. So finally, a very brief introduction from Luke Schaefer, if you can, Luke.
Hi, thanks, Ben. And hi, happy to see everybody here and to be a part of this workshop. So my name is Luke. I'm a food system researcher at the University of Copenhagen. And together with my principal and PI, Christian Bugger Henriksen, we coordinate the Food Shift 2030 project. I would consider myself I guess, early stage researcher, and the Food Shift project is one of my first, let's say, hands-on experiences in terms of, working with people who are influencing policy in their specific regions. So just quickly, I will just say that I speak on behalf of the project today. And of course, there's some members here that will be able to give you examples explicitly. Sorry, I wanted to share a link. There you go. There's a link to our website if you haven't already found it. And that's our 9 food shift accelerator labs. So these are as part of the 4-year project. These are new established labs working towards food system transformation. So I'll park there and we can hear more later. Thanks, Ben.
Brilliant. Thank you, Luke. Well, the idea now is I will pose some very broad questions, and the 3 of you, Eloise, Luke, and Anne, feel free to respond to those questions. If nobody does, I might prompt you a little bit, but otherwise it's fairly free-flowing conversation, so feel free to just jump in. If anybody has questions, please pose them in chat and we can try and pick up on those during the conversation. But I'll keep it moving quite swiftly if that's possible. So the first question, I think, to all of you to consider is, if you think about your place and the work that you're doing, what do you see are the sort of biggest changes in food-related policy since you started that work? So, the biggest changes in the last 10 years, maybe, or possibly how has this influenced the way you look at trying to change food policy? So what do you see as the key changes? Who wants to kick off on that one? Was that a hand up, Eloise? I'll go to you.
It wasn't, but it can be.
Okay, let's go to you. I imagined it.
I realised as I put my hand up, it looked like I was putting my hand up. Yeah, I mean, I'm sort of looking back over this in preparation. I mean, a lot has happened in Bristol. I think, there's strong advocacy for our work within the public health team and the local authority, we've been really lucky with that. There's some people who've been there a long time who really believe in food. So there's been some key public health policies. So a couple of years ago, there was a ban on any junk food outlets being within 400 metres of a school. And then we also banned, a couple of years ago, the council banned any of their advertising from advertising high salt, fat and sugar foods. So kind of junk food ban. I think we were the first local authority outside of London to do that. There's also, the council have really embedded into their own sort of policies around procurement, sustainable food principles. So they have lots of requirements for anyone who does catering for them, which covers things like schools contracts, to have like Food Soil Association Food for Life Served Here award, or their own, they've actually got their own certification called the Bristol Eating Better Awards that covers not only sort of healthy food, but other sustainability considerations. And they've really embedded that stuff in all of their procurement policy. Now they've even gone so far as for high threshold contracts to ask that suppliers have carbon reduction plans in place, all that kind of thing. So they've done a really good job of embedding that. I think what we've seen more recently is starting to pick up pace around thinking about land protection and policy to support more production of food in the city. So there's actually a food growing strategy for Bristol that's been developed as part of a wider new parks and green spaces strategy, and that's going out for public consultation imminently. And that's really brilliant to see, because that's been a culmination of many years' work by people, including us and an organisation called Bristol Food Producers, to really collaborate with the council and lobby them for supporting better food provision. But I think it the ability to grow more food in the city. But I think it also does speak to that thing of, over time, the building up of the impact and the influence of work from people like Bristol Food Network with the council to really, understand that now, with the climate emergency and ecological emergency, this needs to happen. So it's it's the fruits of the labour of all of that work. And the local plan was also updated earlier this year, which is going through its final piece of consultation now. And there's some new food sustainability clauses in there around more provision of food growing space within new housing developments and giving some protection to existing food growing enterprise and other forms of development.
Great.
So, yeah.
Thank you, Eloise. I'll bring in Anne and Luke, whichever of you, and what you hear from Eloise there, does that resonate with you in your work? You know, I was looking at the communities of practice that you were mentioning there. Have they emerged quite recently, or were they there from the beginning of your work, Anne?
They actually emerged in the last few years. And, you know, I think for us, the pandemic was kind of awakening to how intertwined the food system is with so many other systems. And so we saw a surge in interest in, you know, building the infrastructure to be able to even source food locally and regionally. That was a really big thrust. We've lost that capacity over the last 50 years. And so I think there's a big effort to undertake that. We've seen a lot more federal level investment in food systems work, which has been really heartening. It's very competitive, so a lot of groups don't get it, but it still has been a good sign. I think one of the other big areas is this increasing interest and really understanding you cannot be doing this work without the people who are being most affected by it. So our work in racial equity has really been lifted up because there's so much interest in the groups and actually figuring out how do we bring people on board to participate? How do we compensate them for their time? How do we make sure that their engagement is authentic? How do we build leadership among those groups? We have different groups like Mississippi Food Policy Council, and their food justice work down there has created fellowships. So we're seeing that same thing has happened in LA where they do like fellowships. I'd say greater focus on resilience and climate change. It's still kind of a stretch at the local level to figure that out, I think, but there's definitely an effort that's been undertaking. And then our emergency food system has really started to shift its focus from, oh, we're just going to try and feed more and more people, as to how can we source that food that is coming into the emergency food system from local and regional farmers, and focus more on root causes and not just trying to alleviate hunger. And the other one I would just bring up is also like this, what we are seeing more and more of called values-based procurement, where you have a set of criteria that you are hoping to achieve when you are doing procurement contracts. And this can be in public schools, it could be in government institutions, and it's usually around animal welfare, nutrition, workforce, local economies, who's actually benefiting from the efforts, and environmental sustainability. So I'd say those are some of the bigger shifts we've seen in the last few years.
Yeah, and that definitely resonates with my view of what's happening in the UK as well. I won't ask you to explain the federal dimension to this because I really don't understand that. We could get tangled up with stuff, but thank you for that. And Luke, do you want to just is there anything you'd like to add to what we've just heard there?
Yeah, I can't speak to the federal level, but I guess Food Shift as an EU level funded project, I don't know if there's similarities there, but one thing that I was reflecting on hearing Heloise and Anna, was the in Food Shift, when we talk about these Food Shift accelerator labs, these were entities that didn't exist before, or rather they didn't exist as a cohesive unit. They, of course, had food actions and strengths in the food system already, but it was really about establishing this food system living lab. And just reflecting on that, I was just thinking about the importance of this mutual benefits between diverse stakeholders. So in these labs, there's a specific, let's say, methodology, if you will, where the leadership body of the lab consists of a municipal representation, usually an SME and an NGO, and usually a research partner, and kind of providing the base for them to all, let's say, identify those mutual benefits, and then take that kind of common goal to a more broader list of stakeholders in their city regions. So just something on that underlining the importance of multi-actor network and mutual benefits to make change. Thanks.
Brilliant. Well, that sort of begins in a very, very direct way to answer the next question, which is, what are the routes to changing policy at the local level? And, we've heard it previously in the conversations, but from what you just said there, Luke, I think it's really coming out very strongly, this whole idea of bringing together these sort of multi-focus groups, if you like, looking at mutual benefits between different stakeholders, trying to look at using that as a way of crossing some of the agendas that are coming up in different food policy agendas there. So identifying those together and finding common goals. Does that resonate with either of you two there, Eloise and Anne? Would you like to jump in on your thoughts on that, but also what you would consider to be routes to changing policy that have worked in your experience? Maybe go to Anne first on that one.
So I love the idea of mutual benefits, and it reminded me of when we started our work in Baltimore City with the health department and the planning department. And it was in 2008 when there was an economic crisis. And so there wasn't, the city was not only not going to approve a position to be focused on this at the city level, but they weren't even sure, they said, we can maybe house somebody, we can maybe do this, but we don't have any funding. So we went to a number of different funders and got a small amount of money that basically was the equivalent of a salary for somebody to work at like 3/4 time. And the way we sold that was that you are all going to benefit by having a position that's dedicated to food in city government. So you are all trying, you're working out there kind of not at cross purposes, but just not coordinated. And that was a really important selling point. And so I think, Luke, I loved what you said about that whole, how do you get people to see sort of those, the multiple agendas and how they will benefit from it? Because bringing people in as members, people don't always see it. They don't always know why they're being asked to participate. And so it's not just about getting your own organization's agenda accomplished. It's about looking at the larger causes. So I think it is, I really liked that point. And then I think the other one I'll make in terms of like the process that you talked about a little bit, Ben, that we have learned is that now we've got groups, food policy councils that have been working for many years and have a ton of experience to share. And one of the things we also been doing, and this is, we've been doing this specifically in New York State with a small grant from a foundation there, is creating peer relationships. So a council will come and say, we're just getting started, we're working on these issues, and we try to pair them with a group that can help kind of walk them through that process. So they've got, because they are in a far better position to give them advice in some cases than we are. Like we don't have, we're not doing the direct work. So those peer relationships, I think, have been pretty impactful. I'll stop there.
Fascinating stuff. Totally on board with a lot of this, what's being said here. I think all of us working around food recognize that food does inherently cut across a lot of different agendas and also essentially brings people together. So it's a very good place to start breaking down some of those either funding silos or agenda silos. So I think that's very interesting point, really well made there. Thank you. And Eloise, anything you'd like to add on sort of what you see as key routes to changing policy at a local level?
Yeah, I mean, I think, just to start with echoing what Luke and Anne have talked about, as I mentioned, there's been a sort of food governance model in Bristol since 2010 when, some of my colleagues and some other key people in the public and private sector who are really interested in good food in Bristol set up a sort of what was then a food policy council. And there were, people from the public health team involved. So we've had that kind of collaborative, different sectors' voices. I think what's been really important is to grow and expand that. So with Bristol Good Food 2030, we've really been focusing on trying to improve the diversity inclusion of the stakeholder voices. So we've managed to connect more with people who can represent kind of underrepresented or minority communities to sort of elevate their voice. And we work very closely with Feeding Bristol, as I've mentioned in the chat. developer and responsible for the food equality strategy in Bristol. I think, you know, having those people from key public local authority positions in that steering group with a range of other voices is absolutely crucial. And I think I suppose a slightly different thing that we've maybe done as Bristol Food Network around policy. I mean, I don't know if this entirely answers your question, but when we get to the point of a new policy is put out for public consultation that's got food stuff in, we really make sure that as an organisation we really robustly respond to that. And we've got quite good at knowing how to sort of, you know, it's a bit of a dark art responding to public consultations, and we make sure that we really ask all our key stakeholders to input into that public consultation. We maybe even help them to, you know, we try to agree on what the key consistent messages we want to get across there is. So once there is something, a draft policy in place, that we really kind of all sing from the same hymn sheet, and that there's a really good kind of collective voice on that.
Fantastic. Thanks, Eloise. I am scanning the chat at the same time and looking. There's quite a lot of traction around this idea that if you really want to embed your influence that you're having in your local government, you need to do it not just with individuals, because they move around. You know, you'll find a champion and they'll move, and Sophia has drawn attention to that. I think that's a really important point, you know, and you just made it very well as well there, Louise. This whole idea that you try and make a much more embedded relationship with your with the people who are making decisions in local government, rather than just particular individuals. Very hard to do, but it's really important. I might just come back to you there quickly, Luke, because you mentioned this idea of this needs to be facilitated. It doesn't just happen. This bringing together of collaborating stakeholders in order to try and look at common ground. You say there's salary for a leader to facilitate this. Do you want to expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, thanks, Ben. Yeah, exactly this. And that's maybe one of the, let's say, key outcomes of Food Shift is being able to demonstrate a process to or a methodology, if you will, to utilize living labs as a way to bring these multi-stakeholder or multi-actor approaches together. So I guess said another way, you know, it's a technique to bring industry, municipal, and let's say NGO partners all acting in the food system together on a common goal. And one of the things, I guess there's also a question in the chat about how to actually develop relationships with organizations. So one of the ways that we did this in Food Shift was actually establishing a lab. So when I say lab, I mean food system living lab, or it's something like this, but a lab leader. So a lab leader would be the key facilitator, and often this was, let's say, a proactive SME, but not always. And sometimes we had labs led from NGOs, sometimes we had labs led from municipal partners, but it was really key that we have this, let's say, central piece or central person or central team of people that are the lead facilitators and can be first responders, let's say, for lab planning. And of course, in that model, they're supported by a lab host, which we are calling, or we call it a lab host, where we're talking about specifically here the connection to local governance. So having a change maker and a leader, let's say directly working with or having good contact with local governance actors. And finally, we had one last position in this kind of 3-position steering committee, if you will, which is the lab assistant. So a researcher, or usually, let's say a research organization such as a university, being able to bring in, let's say, leading research into the conversation. So maybe just to recap, importance on leadership, connection to local governance, and then also bringing in cutting edge research.
Well, what did you call the second one? You had a lab leader, the bring it together, the lab.
That's right. Okay, so in Food Shift, we implemented this living lab model. We had a lab leader, which is the key facilitator, a lab host, which is the municipal and governance body, and lab assistant, the research. And I can actually see Christian has put into the chat the link for the Establishing Food Shift Guidelines. That's got it all in there. Thanks, Ben.
Thank you for that. I love that leader, host, and lab assistant. It resonates hopefully with others in this group who are working in different sort of approaches to that facilitation of these processes. I don't know, actually at this point I might just ask if anybody else from the participants that I can see there who wants to share anything about their own experience of that sort of facilitation role, whether it's a similar structure with a leader, a host organization, and a sort of a research assistant, or whether there's some other model. I'm obviously thinking of sustainable food place partnerships that have a need for a convener, a bringer together of all of those different voices representing food systems. I know Eloise could talk to that, but does anybody else want to sort of talk about the sort of partnerships and the coordination of partnerships within that network, and how they were sort of in a way resonate with what Luke's just been talking about? I'm not going to ask people to volunteer, even though I can see some partnership coordinators there. But Eloise, do you want to say anything about the situation in? Oh, and Sophia, you've unmuted. Do you want to say?
Carolyn has her hand up.
Oh, I really can't see that for some reason. Sorry, Carolyn. Thank you, Sophia.
That's all right. I'm a coordinator for Fife Food Partnership, and and we've been part funded by Sustainable Food Places over the last couple of years to enable that. So the council match funds my position basically to do that work. And that's been absolutely vital to enable this to happen because I spin loads of plates. I have 5 working groups plus a partnership, and I drive forward that, and I bring together all the meetings and the people, and I do the minutes and I do the actions, and we drive forward all of that. So without that position, we wouldn't have gone forward as fast, because there's, particularly in the community, and my experience, we actually need more facilitators. So for instance, and particularized ones in areas. So for instance, the farmers don't normally talk to councils. They normally talk to NFU, or they normally talk to Scottish Government, and they don't even necessarily talk to each other. So having a farming facilitator is becoming quite important, so that farmers can talk to each other, bring together each other, talk each other's language, and then communicate with councils, because they don't necessarily have the capacity to have somebody just to do the farmers' work. And there's also with communities as well. We have got loads of community groups that are all doing food, and we need them to be part of the community working group. But a lot of them are unpaid, of course, and they work, or they, so they don't come in during the day. So we have got, Scottish Government have just paid FCAN, which is our Fife Community Climate Action Network. They have done a pilot where they have set up a hub where there are 3 paid members that are from Scottish Government funding that enable to facilitate and coordinate the climate action, which is a lot of around food for communities, so that there's paid members of staff doing that, and therefore they sit on our working groups and our partnership because they can be there during the day. So without that, those are just 3 areas where paid facilitators we found are being really necessary to try and move forward change as much as possible.
Thank you, Carolyn. I'm really glad you brought that up. The whole idea that there are different areas of work, themes, if you like, or subgroups, each of which are representing voices of a community, if you like, of a sub-network within a food system. And they also need facilitation. It's a big deal. And that sort of bringing together of those voices is absolutely vital. And it's what we talked about. If you're trying to influence policy, you need to understand what would benefit people on the ground. If you're going to do something, it needs to benefit people on the ground, and you need to ensure that you're hearing those voices in order to ensure that you are synchronizing your what you're trying to influence, if you like. We've got a little bit more time left. I can't see any other hands up. There's one more question I was going to ask, which sort of is like a distillation of what we've heard from our three speakers, Luke, Eloise, and Anne, which is, if you were going to say, what are your top tips, if you like, for how to do this, how to have the most effective influence over local policy or policy at different levels? What are your top tips for trying to change food policy at the local level? I might start with Anne, if that's possible. Just what would you say people should try and explore?
So we've already talked about relationships, and I think the thing that I would offer up is it takes a long time. For the groups that we've worked with, it can take years for them to actually start focusing on policy. There's just a lot that needs to happen to, put into place before policy can kind of be, front and center. So in the process of that, sort of understanding it's going to be a long-term effort, and that you can start out by doing maybe smaller policies to build your policy muscle and your advocacy muscles. Understanding that you may not be the most important policy for your group, but you're getting experience working together to advocate for something that you have collectively decided is important for your community. And so I do feel like that that can be discouraging sometimes because they oftentimes don't pass. I think in the States, we've heard anywhere from 3 to 7 years, like when you start a policy effort, even at the local level, certainly at the federal level, can be even more protracted. But just recognizing and understanding that it's a commitment, and try not to get discouraged, and just look for those smaller wins, and just because we have legislative sessions, and at the local level, it's different, but state level, they all kind of interact and influence one another in the state. So it's hard to kind of distill between those, but a lot of state level policy influences what happens at the local level, and state legislatures only meet 3 to 4 months out of the year. And so those sessions are really busy. And then we're trying to kind of execute that at the local level and see what that looks like. And then within cities, they're making their own decisions as well that are beyond what the state policy does. But it's a long-term game. And the more you do it, the better you get.
Brilliant. Speaking from great experience there as well, and fantastic to hear that. I completely agree with that. This being patient is really important, starting small, but also maybe pushing where the door's slightly open already. Go for the low-hanging fruit if you can. But I might ask the same question then to you, Eloise, in terms of your top tips, distilling what we've been hearing from you. Where would you start?
Yeah, I mean, I think sort of a little bit to follow on from the point you just made about finding where the doors are a bit open. I think, understand what your local council, what your local authorities' priorities are. And, in Bristol, the council has a corporate strategy with some key pillars in it. So those are kind of potentially your entry points, right? I mean, I know in Bristol that the key thing for public health is healthy weight. That is where almost all their focus goes because of the obesity crisis. So, being able to engage with them and offer expertise and, support to suggest policy that might help that is kind of, it's a low-hanging fruit, really. And I guess I would say, don't forget that you're probably someone who's got some expertise that actually is kind of useful to them. So, yeah.
Really good point. It is a long game, but during that journey of sort of building up that momentum, you are becoming really skilled, really experienced, and you speak not just for yourself, you're speaking for a lot of different voices. So you have a lot to offer. I think that's a really good point. So, Luke, where would you say your top tips? So you've probably given us your top tips already, but how would you distill it down?
I would have in a roundabout way for sure, but just listening to the tips already, this and I had a sneak preview of the final output of Food Shifts, and one of the labs is actually saying, just keep doing what you're doing. And this is speaking, I think, exactly to your point here that at some point they are the front runner in their region, and they might feel alone at some points, but they're continuing and they're working and they're let's say trying to build this network of relations. I think rather than a top tip, I just wanted to give an example from Food Shift of let's say something that's happened in a shorter amount of time, I think, relatively speaking. So Food Shift is a 4-year project, and we can say that 9 of the Food Shift labs, or of the 9 of the Food Shift labs, quite a few of them have made progress in their areas. All of them are a bit different, but one I would highlight would be actually it's Wrocław in Poland, and excuse my Polish accent if there's anyone there. But they did not have, we had a municipal partner in Food Shift paid for this period, and they didn't have a food, let's say, team in their council. They do now, and it's a multi-person food-focused team paid, well, I guess co-funded now between the project and the municipal to work on a food policy for the city region. And that was also coupled by they were able to, as a city, sign the Milan Urban Food Policy Pact and are working towards implementing a food strategy. So, the door was already open a little bit. It didn't come from nothing, but there is some progress there in terms of this. Keep doing what you're doing, so to speak. Okay, thanks, Ben.
Thank you very much, Luke. Just in the last 2 or 3 minutes, does anyone want to quickly share anything that we haven't heard from our brilliant sort of inspirers there, from Luke, Eloise, and Anne, that they would consider to be their top tip? You may have put it already on the Jamboard. You may have sort of heard something and that resonated with you. Has anybody else got a top tip that they want to share, or something that they feel is as a route to having this influence at the local level food policy? Anybody want to join in there? Again, I might ask you, Sophia, to keep an eye out for the hands ups, because I'm missing some of them. Okay. Again, there's really interesting stuff coming through on chat, and some good summaries of what we're hearing as well. So thank you, Sophia, for adding points there, which sort of still a little bit about what we're hearing. But I think what I'm going to do now is say thank you very much to Eloise and Anne and Luke. I think that was really valuable. I heard some stuff which I completely agree with. I heard new things that I want to go and explore a little bit more, having had my appetite whetted, to coin a phrase. We're sort of on time, which is great. I'm going to maybe at this point hand over to Luke actually to take a little bit of a lead and tell us about the sort of wrapping up of Food Shift 2030, some of the outputs of what's been achieved, but also this the conference that's coming up. So I'll hand over to Luke, and he'll also introduce Christian, his colleague there. So over to you, Luke.
Thanks, Ben, and thanks for the workshop. So I guess switching hats a little bit and giving you more of a Food Shift direct summary, I guess. One thing I wanted to share with you is that on behalf of a joint EU project, so 5 European funded projects, all on food, got together in a actually kind of voluntary manner, but were able to bring out a policy brief on food system living lab establishment, and longevity. It's not published yet, so I can't share it. Sorry, it was supposed to be. So watch Food Shift Plus. Self-plug, please sign up. But also our website for that coming out soon. I just put in the chat a link. So it's called the EU Food 2030 Project Family, and this policy brief is really kind of trying to summarize some of our learnings, both from Food Shift but also these other projects. And I just wanted to give a couple of key takeaways from that, but it's kind of reiterating what we've talked about, this importance on multi-actor approach, the importance of a strong leader or a strong facilitator. I think you said conveyor, and actually maybe one we didn't touch on so much, but flexibility in funding. So I guess we talked about co-payments from municipalities and initiatives. So yeah, this is really important. Also from, let's say, a project perspective, getting EU funding. So this, to be able to have flexibility built into that, I think is really key for facilitating grassroots lab works. Yeah, so this is just to recap, that's the policy brief coming out very, very soon, and it will be available at our policy conference. And with that, I pass over to Christian, who is the coordinator and the founder of Food Shift 2030. So, Christian, would you like to say a few words?
Yes, thanks a lot, Luke, and thanks everyone, Sustain and Ben and everyone who's organizing this workshop. Well, to be honest, I think it's actually a bit strange to have the last online workshop here. And it's also a bit sad that the Food Shift project is coming to an end. So it doesn't really feel like it's already 4 years since we started the project back in 2020. Also, I think everyone here will agree that if we should succeed in transforming the food system, then we still have so much work to do. I think we can all agree on that. But I'm also really proud to say that thanks to all the engaged change makers in our living labs, in the Food Shift project, and all the researchers that have supported them, we really have made an impact. So the policy brief that Luke mentioned here and introduced, that's one example of one of the major achievements, I think, because it's in collaboration with these other projects. But I was also really like to acknowledge here that in each of the seed regions, our living labs have worked really actively on supporting the innovators in their sustainable food system solutions. And as mentioned during this panel debate, we have created guidelines for establishing these food shift labs, food system labs, that have actually already been inspiring other projects and other living labs to create their labs. So we can be proud of them. And also this whole framework we've made for knowledge sharing and transfer between our original 9 living labs and the 33 fellow city regions. I think that's also actually something that can be used and taken up by others. So you can also find that on the homepage under our resources. We also have made this citizen empowerment scheme that outlines methodologies for how local governments can kind of include citizens and make an inclusive approach on how you can develop food system governance in cities, which I think is important also in relation to the living labs, that we make sure that it really does cover all stakeholders that are present in the city region, that we should ensure. Finally, these resources, they have been included in this recently launched Food Shift Transition Toolkit that can be used like by city regions for supporting this transition to a more local, low carbon, circular, more plant-based food system. And this is a web application that will also be introduced. Also at the conference, it will be included here. And last but not least, of course, we have the Food Shift Interactive Network with the Food Shift Plus email forum managed by Sustain, I think you'll say a little bit more about that shortly. And these are really all great achievements. And I would like to thank everybody who's contributed to these achievements. And of course, this doesn't mean that our work stops. It will continue in FoodShift Plus, and it will also continue in the Food 2030 networks that has just been created by the Clever Food project. So both the collaboration with these other projects in the Food 2030 project family, that will continue in a larger network of 62 projects called the Food 2030 Project Collaboration Network, and also in a new network of living labs that is called the Food 2030 Connected Lab Network. So I'm happy that the work will continue. And as Luke said, that was also one of the feedbacks generally, just keep what you're doing. We will definitely keep what we are doing and work further on transforming the food system. So thanks a lot, everyone. And a special thanks really to Sustain for organizing all these webinars and workshops. That's been a huge task, and you've done an amazing job with that in collaboration with all the everyone who's been involved in organizing that. So thanks a lot to you.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Christian. It's been a pleasure actually to be involved in this as well as facilitators of these sessions, just to see when I look at a screen of all of these people who are involved doing absolutely brilliant work down on the ground, learning from each other, sharing experience. I just looked at the photograph that's on the front of your email forum as well. And it's just a great photograph of great people coming together. I wish I'd been able to travel around a bit more and actually visit some of these projects. So maybe that happens next. But Sophia, I don't know if you want to say anything just in summary, or just sort of any headlines that have jumped out at you from this work that we've been involved in before we finish off. And again, if anybody in the group of participants there wants to add anything in terms of what's jumped out at you, or what's resonated, or what you're going to run away and explore straight away at the end of this. But maybe I'll just hand back to you quickly, Sophia, if that's okay.
I think what struck me the most was how similar the experiences that we have shared are. And how similar some of the challenges as well, even though we're separated, in different countries, different continents as well. So I'm really happy with what has been shared, and while some things are familiar, I've learned new things, and I hope it has been the same for everyone here. So a final plea, if you want to keep the conversation going and connect with like-minded people, join the FoodShift Plus forum. And for those that won't be able to join FoodShift at the final policy conference, I guess check the policy document, because that kind of encapsulates a lot of recommendations for European Commission, but also national and local governments. So that's a useful tool maybe for those in other city regions that have joined, that are not directly involved in FoodShift. Now I'll just pass it on to, if anyone else in this meeting wants to say anything that jumped out at them. This is the moment.
And already people are putting things in chat as well, so feel free to add to chat anything you want to say. I'm going to say a final thank you to our three inspiring speakers, Anne, Eloise, and Luke, and also to Christian for the great sort of summing up he did towards the end there. We've actually finished a little bit ahead of time, which is fantastic. So also thank you to Stephanie from Sustain, who's been sort of supporting us, making this sort of run smoothly in terms of breakout rooms and organizing the session. So thank you for everybody involved. Unless anybody has anything else to say, I'm going to call it and say thank you very much. It's great to see you all. Keep doing what you're doing, I think, to coin a phrase, Luke. Fantastic work. It's great to see you all. And thank you for coming along today. And goodbye.
Thank you.